Thank you, Jessica, and thanks to everyone who made this conference happen. And to all of you for being here. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces and new faces as well. I too want to acknowledge that I'm standing on stolen land, and I want to pay my respects to its original owners, their past and future and present elders. I actually had an academic paper that I planned to present today, but in an act of pure mercy, I decided to spare you, given that you'll be spending today and tomorrow listening to a lot of academic talk. So I decided instead that I would activate my better half of my brain and tell you a story and share with you some of my reflections. I want to begin with a story about a man who I love so dearly. He is my teacher, my source of inspiration in life, my father. Abdul Karim Sabawi is an author and a poet who wrote 6 novels and several books of poetry for and about Palestine, and especially about his home city, Gaza. And like every writer, my father hoped his words were going to change the world, or at least they would contribute to his people's struggle for freedom and for liberation. And he believed that this would happen in his lifetime. He believed he would return to his home in Palestine. So he spent his life carrying his roots in his suitcase and floating above the soil of other countries in a temporary state of suspension, never quite fitting in. But the tyranny of time eventually weighed him down and grounded him in Redland Bay in Queensland. He began to accept that his life was derailed and stolen forever. He began to accept that his life was like the lives of millions of other Palestinians. And he started to wonder if his voice was just another cry in the wilderness. No one listened, no one read, no one understood, no one cared, save for a few. My father is in his late 70s now. He makes a daily trip to the mall where most of the time he drinks his coffee alone. His tongue is burdened with the heaviness of a language he cannot claim, making small talk to strangers who couldn't even learn how to say his name. Abdul Karim Sabawi, that's hard, man. We'll call you George instead. We'll have a nice day. My father, like millions of others, was condemned to a lifetime of estrangement, denied in his old age the ability to find comfort in familiar faces and childhood playgrounds, or to walk on Gaza's beach and carry the sand back to his home in the folds of his clothes like a child a lifetime ago. He will never visit his parents' graves. Both of them died inside the cage, and he was trapped outside. He will not drink coffee with his friends and brothers or hug his nephews and nieces, a generation born in his father's home who he had never met. He no longer asks to live or die in Palestine. He watches Israel's ongoing crimes and the Palestinian factions fighting to the death of their people, and he is heartbroken. And every single day he wakes up ready to once again mount a struggle to resist the feelings of loss, the helplessness that does not only demoralize you to the bone, but it strips you of your self-worth. And he resists, yet the monster of despair is always there, lurking in his depth, tugging at him, pulling him down, seducing him to the bottom of intolerable suffering and unquenchable yearning for a homeland and for a place to belong to. Yet once in a while he would confide in me his darkest fear. Maybe it was all for nothing, ya Samah. Maybe I wasted my life writing. What good are novels and poetry when babies are killed every day? And their deaths don't even get reported. And you know what? He's right. Because death from the siege is considered a natural cause. That's their predicament. No fuel to power the generator that powers essential hospital equipment that powers life. But death from the siege is a natural predicament. No medicine supplies, no access to treatment, no proper food and nutrition. That all doesn't count. It goes unreported because the siege is a natural predicament. So who needs poetry when babies die every day? Who needs poetry? But something happened 2 weeks ago. Something that reinvigorated and inspired both my father and I, just as we thought there was no hope at all. As Palestinians in Jerusalem displayed to the world beautiful, non-violent civil disobedience, and the world ignorantly and maliciously responded with headlines about Jerusalem violence erupting. Something else was happening elsewhere in Palestine. Gaza threw us a lifeline. The old battered city taught us yet another lesson in hope. An announcement on Facebook appeared on my newsfeed. A Christian youth group in Gaza organized a 2-week-long cultural festival in my father's name to celebrate his work. Utilizing arts, crafts, and storytelling, the festival centered around my father's books and poetry. We saw photos of young children drawing the covers of his books for art classes. Youth gathered in circles reading his poems, and an academic panel was put on for the older, die-hard fans of his work. To be honest, this caught us by surprise. Really? Now? They're doing this now, when Gaza is down to 2 hours of electricity a day. Now, when Gaza faces its worst humanitarian catastrophe. Now, when raw sewage is flowing on Gaza's beaches. Who has time for words and poetry? The organizers of the festival called my father on the phone. Now, you have to understand that the simple act of a phone call from Gaza these days takes a great deal of effort and planning and luck. It has to be made during the brief period of time when the mobile is charged and when the internet is working and when the electricity is running and when there are no drones buzzing overhead because drones interfere with the signal, and when 1,001 conditions have to be met to make a simple call, but they did, and they spoke to my father. The organizers explained that now, in Gaza's darkest hour, they needed to seek refuge and find solace, to reinstate pride and hope in the hearts of the young. And they could think of nothing better than my father's poems to inspire, uplift, and help heal their wounds. They used his words to find joy in a life that is grinded by the ugliness of the Israeli occupation. They told him they printed verses from his poems on large posters so they can be seen and read by the new generation, a generation that has known nothing but bitter despair. My father was in tears, and so was I. I was reminded of the proverbial saying, "It is better to light a candle than to curse the darkness." And I imagined the children of Gaza coming from Tufah, the Shati refugee camp, Beit Lahia, Khan Yunis, and elsewhere. I imagined them all gathered in the darkness around a candle that my father lit. And I was so inspired. Gaza taught me that no matter how tired or demoralized or crushed by the weight of the injustices in this world, we must light a candle and another until we finally defeat this darkness forever. And that is why we are here today. And that is what this conference is about. In 2005, after decades of failed negotiations, Palestinian Civil Society lit a candle in the darkness. They started a nonviolent grassroots movement based on international law and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. They called on people of good conscience around the world to apply boycotts, divestments, and sanctions on Israel until Israel ends its occupation of Palestinian land, including East Jerusalem, until Israel fulfills its obligation under international law toward the Palestinian refugees and grants its Palestinian citizens full equality. This call was endorsed by 170 Palestinian political parties, organizations, trade unions, and movements representing Palestinians in the occupied territory, inside Israel's 1948 boundaries, as well as in the diaspora, making it the largest coalition of Palestinian civil society groups and a legitimate representation of the voice of the majority of the Palestinian people. And we are here at this conference to discuss ways in which to respond to this call. And while we do that, let us be mindful of this important fact. Palestinian civil society is not asking us to get involved. They are asking us to end our involvement with Israeli apartheid because we are already knee-deep in complicity. Israel wouldn't exist if not for the support of countries like ours. We are involved as consumers, academics, artists, politicians, diplomats. Even retired seniors strolling in a Westfield mall become involved when approached by sales reps, selling them Dead Sea cosmetics. We are involved through economic and military ties, cultural links, propaganda parading as arts, academic conferences, and intellectual collaboration that whitewash the crimes of Israel. So our primary focus needs to be on decolonizing and freeing ourselves and ending our own complicity. This is our moral obligation, nothing less. And let's face it, if not now, then when? We are part of a global community that is seeing the erosion of democracies. We need to get our game on because the power of the far right is on the rise. And the hate and bigotry they espouse is making us all Palestinian. Oppression knows how to build borders and walls, but it also knows how to move beyond them. So we get stuck behind the wall of us and them, but the fear just keeps on going, paralyzing our ability to critically think and forcing us to accept more draconian laws. So we must always try to connect the dots. The Palestinian struggle and the BDS movement is intersectional. You cannot be progressive only on Palestine and ignore the injustices elsewhere, especially the ones right here under our nose. I've been to Palestinian community events where they fail to even mention the rightful owners of the land they stood on. This needs to change. Elijah Doughty in Kalgoorlie might as well have been Lama Marwan Musa in the West Bank. Both of them were killed when they were run over by racist drivers who saw no value in indigenous lives. And you can't be progressive except on Palestine. You can't reject the BDS movement and insist on a negotiated solution. The last time I checked, Israel and the PA have not held peace talks for 3 years. But even when they were talking, Jewish settlements were growing. So fast, there is little of Palestine left today. You cannot speak of democracy and close your eyes to the hypocrisy that reduces millions to begging for minimum human rights. You cannot support refugees at your doorstep and ignore the rights of return for Palestinians stranded in refugee camps since 1948. You cannot speak of academic freedom while supporting Israeli academic institutions and their complicity in war crimes. You cannot champion freedom of speech and label Palestinian activism a form of terrorism or anti-Semitism. You cannot demand rights for blacks, gays, women, or indigenous children while supporting the ethnic cleansing in Jerusalem and Hebron and other Palestinian villages and towns. We need to explore the common grounds that we stand on. Because while it is true that Israel showcases to the world its technical know-how, its ability to suppress and oppress, its weapons for crowd control, Palestinians too have something to export. We are exporting the resistance. And I'll give you one example. Palestinian youth activists tweeting to protesters in Ferguson gave them tips on how to deal with tear gas. Black Lives Matter activist Niall Ford put it so well when he said that this connection with Palestinians during the protests made him realize that you can't have justice in the US if there is no justice for the Palestinians. So, we need to decolonize our minds. Humanity is beautiful in all of its kinds, so stay human, affirm life. Your tribe and mine, we bleed the same. In this movement, there is no room for racism, so please do call it out. We march in this struggle with our Jewish brothers and sisters. We will not tolerate anti-Semitism. We will call it out, and we will not be polite. Don't let the weight of the powerful right crush you. Black lives lost to power structures that thrive on economic slavery are lives that matter to us all. Environmental destruction hurts us all. The monstrous arms industry that feeds on dead brown children, also known as collateral, is our problem. It is our tax money at work. Fascism and oppression are spreading in our world, and the powers that be are putting us in our place. When the media shuts down the debate, when our leaders and our politicians refuse to listen, when they detain refugees and asylum seekers and call Islam a virus that we must eradicate, when they use terror to terrify us, they are putting us in our place. And clearly, our place is the resistance. So wear it with pride. And keep in mind, it's not enough to know what we're fighting against. We also have to know and believe in what we're fighting for. We have to be able to imagine what the future should be. And I'm not talking about one state or two states. That does not keep me up at night. States can also be oppressive. They can fail to provide the answers to their people's needs. They can fail to protect their citizens. So when I say imagine a future, I am thinking of the rights of the people in these states. Will they have clean water and electricity? Will they have security? Will they have freedom to travel through their borders? Will they have an equal vote in a democracy? Will they have the right to live free with dignity? Will they have access to their own resources? Consider the image that comes to your mind when we say Gaza. We think of hungry, malnutritioned children in houses with bullet holes and no walls. But Gaza has rich resources that are occupied. It could have a thriving economy, enough to wipe out poverty and create jobs for everyone, if it had access to its gas resources. And then there is the Dead Sea minerals, the water aquifers, and so on in the West Bank and in other places of Palestine. So I think of the rights-based movement, and I can't find anything better than the answers that the BDS movement provides in its vision. And I hold that vision: justice, freedom, equality. I'd like to end by saying that Palestinians, through the BDS movement, have lit a candle in the darkness. So let us gather around this candle and find a way to borrow fire from it so that we can each light our own. Together, we can light up enough candles to lift the darkness over Gaza's sky, to rebuild the walls of the houses demolished by Israel's wars and bulldozers, to bring to an end its arbitrary detention and free the political prisoners and the children who were abducted from their beds while they were sleeping at night. Let's light enough candles to stop the land theft and the travel restriction and to lift the siege. Let's light up enough candles to illuminate the path for the refugees so my father can finally go home and so we can forever collapse Israel's apartheid walls. Thank you.